Today I'm sewing and sharing a fun and free pattern. This is the Sam Apron by Helen's Closet. This project comes in handy for everything from cooking and baking to barbecuing and even hairstyling. Any activity where you're trying to keep your clothes clean and your tools handy. And it's also one of those projects that makes a fabulous gift. There are 2 views offered for this pattern that gives you options on how you want to apply your straps. I'm sewing view B today. I've left a link to the pattern below so you can check out all the details, grab a copy, and sew it along with me. So grab that pattern, cut out your fabric, and let's get started. I've used my bias tape pattern piece to cut 2 strips at a 45-degree angle from my fabric. I've taken those strips to my ironing board and I've pressed them in half wrong sides together lengthwise. Now we're going to take 1 strip of bias tape and place it right sides together with the curved edge of the apron bib. Match up the raw edges and pin in place. From the top edge of your apron, measure down 1.5 inches. I've gone ahead and placed a pin at that marking. And from the side edge of your apron, measure 1 inch. And I've placed a pin at that point as well. Now using a 3/8 inch seam allowance, we're going to sew our bias tape to this curved edge of the apron from pin to pin, backstitching at both points to secure. Now that the bias tape is applied to this edge, we're going to trim the seams of the bias tape only. With the fabric still right side up, trim this topmost layer of bias tape fabric down to 1/8 of an inch. Once you've trimmed that 1 layer of bias tape, trim the next layer of bias tape to 1/4 of an inch. Now that we've layered the seam allowance of the bias tape, we're going to take the bias tape and fold it over its own seam and give it a good press all the way around. And at this point, you can also trim off the excess seam allowance beyond the end of the stitching lines on the side and at the top. Now with that bias tape pressed out, we're going to understitch. We're going to sew the bias tape to the seam allowance that's underneath, 1/8 of an inch away from the original stitching line from the top to the bottom. Now that it's understitched, we're going to fold back the bias tape to the wrong side of the garment just along its seam line. Once it's tucked underneath, go ahead and give this edge a good press. Here's the wrong side of my apron with my bias tape pressed toward the wrong side. Now we're going to take this back to the sewing machine and edge stitch close to this inside edge of the bias tape from the top of the bias tape all the way to the opposite end. Repeat all of these steps to attach your remaining piece of bias tape to the opposite curved edge of your apron. Now we're ready to press up our bottom hem. I've taken the bottom of my apron to the ironing board and I've pressed up that bottom edge to the wrong side by 1.5 inches. I've also pressed the raw edge to the wrong side by 1/4 of an inch, all the way across. With your hem folded up that 1.5 inches and the 1/4 inch raw edge tucked underneath, edge stitch close to this inner fold all the way across. Now we're going to take the sides of our apron to the ironing board and press them to the wrong side by 1/2 of an inch, and then 1/2 of an inch again. Do this on both sides of your apron. And then we're going to edge stitch once again close to this inner fold all the way from the top to the bottom, edge stitching both sides of your apron for a nice finish. Grab your chest pocket piece, take it to your ironing board and fold down the top edge to the wrong side by 1 inch. Additionally, press the raw edge of the fabric also to the wrong side by 1/4 of an inch. With your hem folded back and that raw edge tucked under by 1/4 of an inch, edge stitch close to this inner fold all the way across. Now take the chest pocket back to your ironing board and press the sides to the wrong side by 1/2 of an inch, as well as your bottom edge. Now with the edges of the pocket all top stitched and pressed to the inside, place the wrong side of your pocket on the right side of your apron fabric at the top. Center it in place from the sides and place it about 4 inches from the top of the fabric. And pin in place. Then we're going to top stitch the pocket all around the sides and the bottom with 2 separate seam allowances. Starting at one top edge, sew with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around the sides and the pocket until you're back at the other top corner. Then pivot your stitching across that top edge And sew once again all the way around with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Again, pivoting your stitches at this top edge to meet the stitching that you began with. Now we're going to sew some dividing lines into our top pocket. The instructions say to mark a line 4 inches away from the side of the pocket, and then an additional line halfway between the edge and the line we just drew. But you can choose to customize the distance of those sewn lines in your pocket. I'm choosing to just do one sewn line 2 inches from the edge of my pocket. Mark that line with your preferred marking tool. Take it to your sewing machine, starting your stitches with a few stitches back and forth to secure this area, and then continuing the stitching all the way to the bottom of the pocket, again back stitching to secure. Prepare your waist pocket in the same way as we did for the chest pocket. First pressing the top edge to the wrong side by 1 inch, and then additionally pressing that edge to the wrong side by 1/4 inch. And then take those pressed edges to your machine, and with that raw edge tucked under, we're going to edge stitch this inner fold all the way from one side to the other. Now you can press those sides and bottom edges to the wrong side by 1/2 inch, with the wrong side of your waist pocket facing the right side of your apron. Center your pocket from the side edges, and place the top of the waist pocket 7 to 9 inches away from the bottom of your chest pocket. And then pin in place. With this waist pocket pinned in place, set it aside for now. Grab your towel loop pieces, and we're going to take them to the ironing board and press the long edges to the wrong side by 1/4 inch. Once those long edges are pressed to the inside, we're going to press it once again in half, wrong sides together. Edge stitch all the way around all of the edges for both loops with an 1/8 inch seam allowance. Then take your towel loops back to your ironing board and press one of the short edges under by 1 inch, and do this for both loops. Take the top unfolded raw edge of your towel loop so that the opposite folded edge is tucked under and facing the right side of your apron fabric. Tuck that raw unfolded edge underneath one of the side edges of your waist pocket, just below the top edge top stitching. Tuck it underneath by about 1/2 inch and then pin in place. Do this to attach both of your towel loops to both sides of your waist pocket. Now we can edge stitch around the sides and bottoms of the waist pocket, stitch with the same seam allowances that we used for the chest pocket, stitching from one top corner and all the way around with an 1/8 inch seam allowance, and then pivoting our stitching at the opposite top corner to come back around with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, until we're back where we started, and then pivoting our stitching once again to meet our original 1/8 seam allowance stitching, back stitching to secure. Now that we've finished top stitching the waist pocket, we can top stitch and secure the loose end of our towel loop. Folding over that edge that we pressed earlier, place your towel loop flat against the fabric. Then we're going to top stitch that material that's folded underneath, sewing in a square around that 1 inch section, and also sewing an X over it to secure. For view B, we have 3 straps, and we're going to fold and press these straps just as we did for the towel loops earlier, pressing both of the long edges to the wrong side, 1/4 inch, and then folding the strip in half, wrong sides together, all the way across. Now take your folded strip with those 1/4 inch edges pressed to the inside, and we're going to edge stitch along both of our long edges. And do this for each of your straps. Here is the topmost edge of my apron. Take this edge to the ironing board and press the hem down 1 1/4 inches. Additionally, you're going to press that raw edge to the wrong side by 1/4 inch. Go ahead and pin that folded edge in place. At this point, we can take one of our straps and attach it to either end of the top of the apron, and then try it on to determine if we want to adjust the length of the next strap or not. So just secure those edges in place, and go ahead and try on your apron. Once you've determined how long you want your next strap to be, just make sure that on either end of that measurement, You're leaving 2.5 inches on both sides for seam allowance. Take both of the short raw edges of your neck strap and tuck it under the top folded edge of the apron, tucking it under so that it meets the crease of the top apron fold. The side of your strap should sit right next to the edge of your bias tape, and pin in place. Do the same on the other side. Now with the strap laying just like this, pointing downward and facing the wrong side of our garment, we're going to stitch across the inner folded edge of the top of the apron, catching the straps as we sew. Sew across this fold with an 1/8 inch seam allowance. Turn your strap upward over that top folded edge. I'm going to clip my straps to secure. Now we're going to sew across the top edge of the apron, once again catching the straps as we sew. Sew across once again with about an 1/8 inch seam allowance. Now we can reinforce these sections at the top of the apron at the edges of the straps. On both sides, we're going to sew a square formation with an X in the middle, just as we did for the towel tabs earlier. Do this at both edges, just sewing this area with the strap in between. For the remaining 2 straps, fold under one of the short edges to the inside by 3/4 of an inch. Now at the top of the side edge of our apron, just below the curved edge, we're going to place the folded edge of our strap so that it faces the wrong side of our apron. Place the edge of your strap in line with the edge of your bias tape, and place the raw edge of your strap fold in line with the inner folded edge of your side seam, and pin in place. Now, just as we did earlier, we're going to sew a box stitch around this folded edge of our apron strap. And do this for both of your side straps. Once you've tried on your apron to determine if you're happy with the length of the straps, you can trim them if necessary, and then we can hem them. Take the raw edges of your straps and fold them to the inside by 1/2 inch, and then 1/2 inch again, and then you're going to top stitch that folded edge in place. Do this for both of your straps, and then you're all done with your apron. Thank you for watching this sew along. Make sure you check out my other videos for more great sewing inspiration, and I'll see you in the next video.